Oh, hi. I haven't seen you in a long time. How have you been? No. How have you been? Uh-huh. Okay, so you just got back into town yesterday, right. So how have you been? What does the question, how have you been, mean? Why can't you just say, how are you, or how are you doing? Yeah, good question. You'll learn all that and more in today's lesson. Hey again, everybody. Kris here, and if it's your first time meeting me, then nice to meet you, and how are you doing? And if you've already met me before, then it's great to see you again, and how have you been? I see what you did there. I have over 1 million students around the planet, and so many of them ask me the same question. What's the difference between how have you been and how are you, or how are you doing? And the first and simplest answer to this question is that how have you been is in the present perfect tense, and how are you and how are you doing, these are different present tenses, right? How are you, this is present simple, and how are you doing, this is present continuous. But I know we hate grammar and we hate when we say all of these grammar words, so let's go to explanation number 2. How are you and how are you doing are asking about something now. They're asking about your feelings now. They're asking about your status or how you are right now. But how have you been asks about the time before now. It asks about the recent time that happened before now, and that time period finishes now. So we see some kind of result now that's connected to whatever we were doing during that time period. For example, you might say, I haven't taken a shower in a week. It means that for that 1 week time period before now, I did not take a shower, and we can see the result of it now. Really? A week? This is called present perfect in English grammar, and it gives people nightmares. But let's simplify it a little bit. Let's make it really easy to understand. Instead of thinking about these time periods, just think of until now. Something happened until now or before now. And if I ask you, have you eaten any food today? This means from the beginning of the day until now, have you eaten any food? Did you eat food today? Right? Oh, stop talking about food. So when someone says, how have you been? They're asking, how are you now and how were you from the last time that I saw you until now? Right? They're saying, how are you until now? That's what how have you been means. So when can we say this phrase? Go on, I'm listening. Well, we don't say this phrase when we first meet a person, right? When we first meet a person, we might say, nice to meet you, and we say, how are you? How are you doing? How's it going? Something like this. But we don't say, how have you been? Because this means until now. But if I just met you, then our relationship, our connection just started now. So we don't have any history. We don't have anything before now. So that's why we can't say it. But when I see my friend who I haven't spoken to in a long time, this is the perfect situation for me to say, hey, how have you been? It means since the last time that we spoke, or since the last time that we saw each other, right? How are things going with you in this last period of time since we last spoke? That's what it means. Now, another situation where we might say, how have you been to someone, is when they tell us about a sad or negative situation, an unlucky situation. For example, they might say, my wife and I are getting divorced. And you say, oh, I feel bad for you. How have you been? And the person means, how have you been since the moment that this happened, right? From that moment when this started until now, how have you been? If someone has an illness, they might say, oh, I just found out that I have cancer. And you might say, that's terrible. How have you been? And it means, since you found out that you had cancer, how are things, right? What's going on? What news are you going to tell me? How are you feeling about all of this, right? A lot of times friends might ask this question, and it is a question that doctors ask a lot. How have you been sleeping recently? And how have you been eating? And how have you been speaking English recently? Okay, let me look at these results. But they'll usually ask something after it. They'll say, how have you been sleeping, for example? And this is really important to understand because it's different. If we just ask someone, how have you been, then this is the verb to be. And this is about how they feel. But when we add this extra word at the end with ing, how have you been sleeping? How have you been eating? Then this is a different type of verb. Now it's not just the present perfect. Now it's present perfect continuous. And doctors might ask you this because they're asking about the recent period of time before now or until now. They're asking, how have you been sleeping recently? How have you been eating recently? And this means each day you eat, each day you sleep. This is the continuous part. And from this period of time, this recent period of time, how have those continuous actions been? That's what the doctor's asking, right? Because they want to know about what's happening in your life. And they might ask a question like, how have you been sleeping? How have you been eating? Parents might ask this to their child. How have you been doing at school? And maybe you would say this to your colleague. You might say, I haven't been getting a lot of work done recently. Or, I haven't been focusing enough. And all of these phrases talk about the recent past connected to now. And now I'm going to let the sitting down version of me explain different pronunciations of this phrase. All right. So the first pronunciation is the one that everybody knows. How have you been? It's just pronounced how it's written. But most people don't pronounce it like that. Most people speak quickly and it sounds more like, how have you been? How have you been? How have you been? How have you been? So you can see it's not so much, how have you been? Right? This sounds too rigid and it doesn't sound so natural. It doesn't flow. Instead, we have, how have you been? How've you been? How have you been? Now, another pronunciation of this phrase is, how you been? Where we can take out the word have completely. Now, people understand that you're asking with the word have. They understand that it's present perfect, even though native speakers don't know that it's called the present perfect. They know that it works that way. So when you say, how you been? And you skip the word have, it's still the same grammar and everyone still understands it the same way. This is just a faster and maybe even slang way to say this phrase. You're asking how I been? No, how you been? How you been? We can also ask this question about other people. We can say, how's she been? Or how's he been? Maybe you have a really good friend and you're close with your friend's family and he says, my parents are coming to visit this weekend. And you say, oh, that's great. How have they been? Right? You want to know about his parents and how they are doing and what's going on with them in their lives. You want to make sure that everything's good with them. Very good. Now, another question that a lot of people ask me is, Kris, how should I answer the question, how have you been? Right? Like if a native speaker asks me, how have you been? What am I supposed to say? I've been good? Well, yes, that's one way to say it. But really, because this is an open-ended question, it means there's an unlimited number of correct answers. And there's so many creative ways that you can answer this question. So I'm going to give you a few examples right now, but you can also go over to our website, krisamerikos.com/blog, and check out the blog article about how have you been, where we have 50 different ways that you can answer this question, including how native speakers usually answer. But the way that I usually answer is I say, not bad. How have you been? Not bad. How have you been? Great. I usually keep my answers short and to the point. I'm kind of a direct person, people have told me. I'll say, But I agree, there are some fun answers to this question too. Like someone asks you, how have you been? And you say, can't complain, right? This means I can't say anything bad. I can't complain about my life. I can't complain about what has been happening recently. Another example is, how have you been? Still breathing. And this one means that I'm alive and no other words necessary. There's no explanation. I'm just alive and that's how I have been. So this person wants to say there's no details, nothing special. Another common one is, how have you been? Never better. It means I have never been better. I am having the best time of my life right now. This is the greatest time to be alive. That's how I am. So you can see that there are a lot of different ways that you might answer this question. Some of them are simple, some of them are more complicated, and it's probably best for you to know a few different answers because you'll be speaking with different groups of people, right? If you're speaking in a more formal situation, then you probably want to keep your answer short and sweet. But if you're speaking in an informal situation with young people and friends, then a more creative answer might be a lot more fun. That's all for this video lesson. I'm Kris. Thank you so much for watching, and leave me a comment down below to let me know how you have been doing. If you like this video, go ahead and press like, press subscribe, and hit that bell so that you know every time when we release a new video. Do you think they clicked it yet? Okay, I'll keep going.